To be clear, I am not victim blaming, however this may come across. This video is an objective analysis of the victim whilst maintaining my unwavering compassion and empathy for the victim, and acknowledging and understanding the pain and trauma that they themselves have experienced. Through witch hunts, silent treatment, and smear campaigns, the victim often ends up causing more harm and trauma to the autistic person in distress than the autistic person in distress originally caused the victim. We don't often see this though, because we insist on perceiving the world through a traditional moral lens, whereby certain behaviours render a person bad or evil or deserving of contempt, even when the person manifests these behaviours uncontrollably at a time they are vulnerable, in pain, and in the throes of an attack of their past trauma. Through the lens of traditional morality, anyone on the receiving end of the autistic person's distress behaviour is automatically sympathised with, which they should be, because they are in pain and will need love and support at this time. What happens next, though, is more sinister than people might imagine. The victim is often incapable of seeing the person who caused them harm for what they are, a person who, when in distress, has little to no control of their behaviour. In fact, victims will say to you that it helps them to ignore the nuances and complexities of the person who hurt them. It's much easier and much safer to see them as a demonic scumbag. It helps them to justify what happened to them. If they see the person who hurt them for what they are, a traumatised or neurodivergent person whose harmful behaviours are actually not reflective of the good person they are in their heart, then this means that they'll have to give up their victimhood status, which brings them comfort and validation, and it means that the person who hurt them is deserving of compassion and understanding. "No," cries the victim, "they hurt me, they are bad. Don't excuse their shitty behaviour, they must be punished." What if the victim has more control over their careful plots for revenge than the autistic person in distress had in the original outburst that hurt the victim? Given that the autistic person in distress hurt the victim at a time their conscience and empathy and self-control were unavailable to them, doesn't this mean that the victim has morally failed more than the autistic person in distress who originally hurt them? We haven't even mentioned that an event or action had to trigger the autistic person's distress in the first place. What if it was the victim? Are they off the hook though, because the trigger falls outside of the parameters of bad behaviour, where the reaction falls within? Not to mention when the victim rallies others to collectively avenge the person in distress who originally hurt the victim. What's most disturbing in this situation to me is that the angry mob will not empathise with the person they are hurting, and they will not relent. Why? Because they will not give up their victimhood status, and they refuse to see the person they're attacking as anything other than a cruel, calculated abuser who deserves what they are getting. The victim says, "No excuse for abuse," when others point out that the person who hurt them is neurodivergent and traumatised. But can't we apply the same logic to the person trapped in victimhood? Just because you were more recently traumatised than the person who traumatised you, is that an excuse to view them as an abuser when the fact is that they are traumatised, neurodivergent and out of control? Are you excusing yourself from leaving reality behind? And is your victimhood an excuse to gang together with others and strategically plot a revenge plan that smears the person in distress who hurt you as a demon, ultimately ruining their life and reputation? Is that fair? Are you excusing yourself from ruining a person's life? Thought experiment aside, I don't see the phrase "using that as an excuse" as helpful to anyone on either side. It is ableist and crude. It's not about excuses. There are perfectly sound explanations for why people act the way they do, regardless of whether they are the victim or the person doing the hurting. Some people choose to ignore these explanations, though, and utilise the phrase "no excuse for" when they are unable to confront the reality that the person who hurt them is a hurt person too. Victims are traumatised and they need to address their trauma. Instead, they often find it impossible to step away from the drama triangle, because giving up their victimhood status means that they have to give up a precious primary source of validation, sympathy, and attention. Victims are the recipients of trauma, yes, and they need help with their cemented inner pain. But when we drop the damn traditional moral lens for just a moment, and we look at this through the lens of suffering, we can see that when the victim insists on regarding vulnerable neurodivergent people with complex trauma responses as evil, bad, or abusive, and when the victim, along with the many others they recruit to their cause, dedicates their time and energy to essentially ruining the life of the person in distress who originally hurt them, they, the victim, often causes more trauma to the person who hurt them originally than they caused them. And to conclude, over a longer period of time, the person who originally hurt them not only hurt them at a time they were in meltdown or distress, but they may have only done it once and once only. The person trapped in victimhood, adhering to traditional morality, will then proceed to counterattack multiple times and justify this each time whilst claiming that I am the victim and this person hurt me in this way, which makes them bad. Because they're bad and I'm the victim, my counterattacks are justified every single time. The need to be victim is so strong that even when the person who hurt the victim apologises, it is at best not taken seriously or deemed insincere, and at worst deemed manipulative. If the victim has to see the person who hurt them as bad, evil, or abusive, and if giving up victimhood feels scary and unsafe, then apologies will always be rejected. This is actually fucked up. What makes it fucked up is that people can't see what's going on because many of us are too busy showering the victim with the sympathy they seek and showering the person who hurt them with contempt or ridicule, even though the person who hurt them is hurt, vulnerable, and traumatized themselves, and needs love, compassion, and understanding. And yeah, hey, they were originally triggered by something too. There is no such thing as an overreaction. So long as we view people as bad or good, we won't ever be able to see or even comprehend that a person trapped in victimhood is often causing more harm than the person who originally hurt them. To the victims out there, despite all of this, I'm not going to do what you do and label you as bad people and thus publicly condemn you. I will see you for what you are, traumatized individuals stuck and in desperate need of help, exactly like the people who harmed you. Victims, you are harming people too, but this will always be justified so long as human beings perceive the world through the lens of traditional morality and don't look at people as either suffering or thriving. Victims, get help. Address your trauma. Don't allow your trauma responses to hurt others. Wow, how the tables have turned. That goes for you too, autistic people who hurt others when in distress. Just because you're in distress and hurt people in meltdown, it doesn't mean the rest of us condone or accept your behaviour. We understand why you hurt people, but you must do what you can. You must do what you can do your end to minimise the pain. Find out why certain things make you triggered. Person who triggered the autistic person's meltdown, stop claiming that the autistic person overreacted and stop saying all I did was no gesture is objectively nice. What you think of as harmless could be immensely harmful to someone else. The quicker you understand that, the better. This is truly taking responsibility. Everyone takes responsibility, not just the person who hurt the victim. We are all in this together. Put down the damn traditional moral lens and smell the coffee. Hurt people, yes, and the people who are hurt by the hurt people often go on to cause more hurt themselves. Enough. Through empathy, compassion, and everyone taking responsibility, we can break this cycle. Through smear campaigns, through the need for revenge, through refusal to relinquish victimhood, and through the insistence on seeing sick people, vulnerable people, and distressed neurodivergent people as bad, evil, and abusive demons who deserve to be punished and publicly condemned, we perpetuate the suffering cycle. I must stress, I'm not talking about sexual assault or domestic abuse victims here. I'm talking solely about neurodivergent conflicts and exchanges. I see this cycle happening within the community time and time again, and it needs to be broken.